Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. I have a feeling that Ron would have appreciated the time of this service because this is the most beautiful time of day in the Wallace All-Faith Chapel as we sit and the sun begins to set and the room is cast with a kind of golden glow. It's my favorite time of day to just come and sit in here, so I'm glad you get to share that today. Well, anyone who knew Ron Rotunda professionally knows about his extraordinary accomplishments, his work in Washington for the famous Watergate Committee and the Ken Starr investigation, that he advised governments of Cambodia, Moldova, Romania, and Ukraine on drafting their first democratic constitutions, that he was a highly distinguished professor at Chapman University, the University of Illinois, and George Mason University, and in other places, including universities in Belgium, Venezuela, and Italy. They also know that he wrote a lot of books, over 200 of them. He wrote more books than most people read. Ron's brother Don tells how Wayne Lefebvre, his colleague at the University of Illinois, once described reading Ron's resume as my most ambitious undertaking since War and Peace. Professor Rotunda joined the Fowler School of Law in 2008 and has held the Doy and D. Henley Chair and Distinguished Professor of Jurisprudence, where he taught professional responsibility, constitutional law, and other courses. He was a constant presence in Kennedy Hall, as those of you that work there know, arriving early in the morning, nearly every day, and working late in the day. He had intelligence, but also a wicked sense of humor, which we may hear a little more about today. What always impressed me personally about Ron was how frequently he would just show up unexpectedly to hear a student speak in this chapel or another speaker. He was one of those few professors who took such an interest and gave so much time. One of those rare professors that I think makes Chapman University exactly what it is, an institution of personalized learning and personalized education, where professors go out of their way to interact and to be involved and to care for our students. His passing is really a tremendous loss for this community, for the Fowler School of Law, for Chapman University, for the legal academy, the legal profession, and I know individually and personally for each person who's come here today. A wise person in my life once said to me, "We grieve those things we never even had. We grieve the future days and conversations and text messages and collaborations that won't happen." As Maya Angelou begins her poem, When Great Trees Fall, she writes, "When great souls die, our memory suddenly sharpened, examines, gnaws on kind words unsaid, promised walks never taken. Individually, we grieve. And even weeks after his passing, we come together today to remember, to hear about Ron's work, his life, his vast humor from those who knew him well, as we will in a few moments, to listen and to tear up and to laugh together. We've come because a great soul existed, a great soul in our lives. No matter how well you knew Ron personally, you've come here in this hour to join in community, to remember with others who may find themselves like you do, perhaps in almost a different space and time. It feels surreal with the new realization that what was urgent before doesn't really matter so much. Sometimes we have the feeling that concerns we thought were so paramount are really not that big anymore. They've shrunken in importance. You've gathered, I suspect, to be in community, to be supported but also to support the other people here, because as humans, we struggle with death that comes so unexpectedly, catching us unprepared, especially when it comes too soon. We gather because we each contemplate human questions and grief and need to make sense of them, and it's easier to do it together. But you may also have come here because you suspect, we all might suspect, that there's meaning here too. We gather because somehow we know that the more we remember and the more we celebrate about the life and the accomplishments of Ron, the better persons we become. We come to be inspired. We come to be better ourselves because we knew him. As Angelo ends that same poem, and when great souls die, after a period, our senses restored, never to be the same, whisper to us, they existed. They existed. We can be and be better, for they existed. This afternoon, we're going to hear from Ron's president and Ron's dean and Ron's student and colleague. We're going to hear from a number of people. Ron was a member of the Roman Catholic faith, so we will also hear from the scriptures from his faith that were read at his funeral at St. Norbert's Church. Before we hear from those people, I'd like to invite you to join me in an invocation and to join me in prayer as Ron found meaningful, if you find that meaningful as well. Or please simply use this time to call upon that which is meaningful to you, be it the interconnectedness of all of us or the depth of the human spirit. If it's your custom to close your eyes or fold your hands, I invite you to do so, or to sit in quiet reflection. Please join me in the invocation. We join our hearts today in remembrance and celebration of Ron Rotunda. In our grief, we hover quietly in the precipice between this life and what comes after. We pause at this portal where what is really significant about life and love and work slowly trickles or even suddenly streams into our understanding. So may we grow in our understanding. May we be better persons for having known Ron. May our time here be filled with the wisdom and humor, the character and spirit of his presence. May the Spirit of God and the faith in the best of humanity fill us. And may Ron rest in the assurance of his faith. Welcomed into life everlasting, may he rest in peace. Amen.
The other occasions that Ron would appear for would be Catholic Mass on Wednesday here in our chapel. A reading from the Book of Wisdom. The just man, though he dies early, shall be at rest. For the age that is honorable comes not with the passing of time, nor is it measured in terms of years. Rather, understanding is the hoary crown of men, and an unsullied life, the attainment of old age. He who pleased God was loved. He who lived among sinners was transported. snatched away, lest wickedness pervert his mind or deceit beguile his soul. For the witchery of the paltry things obscured what is right, and the whirl of desire transforms the innocent mind. Having become perfect in a short while, he reached the fullness of a long career, for his soul was pleasing to the Lord. Therefore, he sped him out of the midst of wickedness. But the people saw and did not understand, nor did they take this into account. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
A reading from the second letter of St. Paul to Timothy. Beloved, I am already being poured out like a libation, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have competed well, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. From now on, the crown of righteousness awaits me, which the Lord, the just judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but to all who have longed for his appearance. The Lord stood by me and gave me strength, so that through me the proclamation might be completed, and all the Gentiles might hear it. And I was rescued from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil threat, and will bring me safe to his heavenly kingdom. To him be glory forever and ever. Amen. The word of the Lord.
Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Matt Parlow, the Dean of the Fowler School of Law. It's really wonderful to look out and see not just colleagues and students from the law school, but people from all across campus. It says a lot about the impact that Ron had on this community and how fond we all were of him, and what a loss it is for the Fowler School of Law and Chapman University. When we started to plan this memorial service, we were thinking about how do we both grieve the loss but also celebrate Ron's life in a way that was reflective of him. And so you will get some humor a little later. And as everyone knows, Ron had a really wicked, funny, almost disarming sense of humor. Wanted to say a few thank yous. Wanted to thank, obviously, Gail Stearns and her staff here at the Interfaith Center for helping put on today's memorial service. Thank you to Jane Kaser and others at the law school who helped plan it. Thank you very much to the family, the Rotunda family, for giving us the opportunity to do this and for being here with us. It means a tremendous amount to us to be able to gather with you to remember Ron and to celebrate his extraordinary life. If anyone were to try to stand up here and remember Ron appropriately, we'd be here for at least 2 or 3 weeks. He had one of the most remarkable careers that anyone could dream to have. To call him a titan, both in legal education and the legal profession, is probably still an understatement. It says a lot. I think Gail captured really his impressive resume, but when you get an obituary written about you by John Dean and so many others who are so prominent in this country, when you have his passing making international news, you know what kind of an impact the man had in his career. But I think we feel that great loss here because of the person Ron was and the colleague he was to all of us, the mentor he was to his students. He was a constant presence at the law school. He was always at events, always there to support his colleagues, and it is something that I think we are still feeling. I know I am still feeling in terms of that loss. His passing was jarring and shocking and sudden, and as Dean Stearns was saying, that is a hard thing to, as a community, to grapple with. And this hopefully will be helpful in that process as we continue to process that and to mourn the loss of Ron. Before I turn it over to those who are going to speak about Ron from different perspectives, I wanted to announce officially and publicly one of the many ways in which we will help to remember Professor Rotunda hereafter. Our annual Law Review Symposium this coming year will be dedicated to the impact of Ron Rotunda's scholarship and work, both in legal scholarship and in the legal profession. I think it will be arguably one of the best ones we've ever done, if not the best one we've ever done. We have a lot to work with, and we're going to have wonderful people coming out for it. So we will have other ways in which we remember him, but that will be one of the really meaningful ways we can continue his legacy forward. When we were planning the service, we wanted to have different perspectives talking about Ron. So we're fortunate to have with us the president of Chapman University, Daniele Strupa, who will be speaking, one of his colleagues, Professor Kathy Heller, and then one of his students and his research assistant, Drake Mersch, just to give some insights and to remember Ron from different people's perspectives. So with that, President Strupa.
Thank you, Matt. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to begin by thanking the family and the Dean for allowing me to say a few words about Ron. It was a very important friendship to me, and I'm pleased to be able to be with you for a few minutes. To begin with, it's very hard, as the Dean said, to compress Don's personality in just a few minutes. He was a person with a multifaceted kind of individual, and every aspect of his personality was enchanting and fascinating in different ways. So I will begin with the obvious, the easy one. He was a very elegant man. Everybody here today is wearing a bow tie, and it was impossible to see him that was not perfectly appointed. And now that I got to meet his brother, I can see that this is in the family. So this must have been something inherited from your family. He's one of the things that I admire him from. There are many things. Some are deep, some not so deep. Maybe the not so deep is the fact that he was actually able to tie his own bow tie. Something that I have not been able to master yet. So I did buy once a bow tie, the real thing, and I went on YouTube trying to figure out how to do it. I still have the one that you just clip on. So, speaking of his elegance, I found this beautiful old newspaper clip from November 27, 1973. He was only 28 years old. And the title says, "A New Teenage Idol, Man from Watergate." And the text says, "The man who drew the shouts, applause, whistles, and stomps from the students at Great Neck North Junior High School yesterday was not Paul Newman, but a small mustached lawyer in a blue pinstripe suit." So his elegance was already at the very beginning of his career. And this is this wonderful picture of him in this audience. And of course, he was part of the Watergate trials, and so that's why he was speaking there. Ron was a romantic, and he was an Italian. He was always using his hands when he was speaking. This was his most famous gesture. I remember talking to him, and he would do this. And those who disagreed, and many people disagreed with his ideas and his speeches, those that he vanquished during a debate, should have learned a very easy trick. Just hold his hands, and he would have not been able to be as eloquent. I'm glad we never gave them this tip. I talk about him being a romantic and an Italian, and I'm going to share a kind of a private moment, but there was a time in which he came to my office because he felt that a colleague had been discourteous to his wife, Kindra. And he was telling me, and he was so upset that tears were actually coming out of his eyes as he was describing to me the incident. And that to me it was a magical moment. You have in front of you this giant, this eloquent man, this powerful lawyer, but inside he was this gentle man. And I know what you're going to say, well, you Italians, you always cry more easily than anybody else, and maybe that's part of it. But that was a turning point in my relationship with Ron, because I saw a man in all of his complexity, in all of his beauty. He was not just a romantic, an Italian, and an elegant man, but he was also, as I said before, a ferocious and formidable debater, both in his verbal debate as well as in the written words. His style was direct, strong, and I think that everybody who read his stuff or who heard him in a debate, even when they disagreed, they had to concur that his arguments were impeccable and tight and impossible to draw holes into. I've read many of his articles, and this article didn't always make him popular. He really didn't care. He said to me once, you know, Daniele, any good lawyers know the distinction between a bad idea and a bad person. And that's something that I hope we all remember, especially in this very divisive time. We need to be able to make that distinction. We may not appreciate somebody's ideas. We need still to understand the humanity behind it. He was one of the most regarded legal scholars in the country, and I remember when he joined Chapman in 2008, the Lawyers Weekly published a very lengthy blog on his move. They don't do this for everybody, you know. Faculty move from university to university, and generally speaking, nobody cares. When he moved to Chapman, everybody paid attention. And I'm going to just read a few words from the blog. He says, the Rotundas, because of course he came here with Kindra, are following a now well-worn path from George Mason to Chapman. And I'm glad to see my good friend Vernon and his wife Candace here in front of us. They were part of the first wave. And I see here Jeff Tollackson's wife, and the physicist was the second wave, and then Ron came in. And in fact, I was proud because this blog credits me with creating this path, something that I'd be always proud about. And then he goes on and tells about how his academic credentials are highly regarded, magna cum laude graduate of Harvard Law, clerk at the Second U.S. Circuit of Appeals, and so on and so forth. He co-authored, as we heard before, more than 200 books, 500 articles, and has been cited more than 2,000 times, making him one of the top 10 legal scholars in terms of citation in the history of the United States. So I said I read many of his articles, so I need to make a clarification. I didn't read any of his legal articles. But I read lots of his kind of public policy commentaries that he wrote since he arrived here. He used to send me and President Jim Doty, I don't know if Jim is here now. No, he probably couldn't make it, but he used to send the two of us emails that always began in the same way. He said, the good book says not to hide your light under a bushel. So here it goes. Now, so obviously this is from the gospel, but he was telling us, this is really important what I'm telling you. And he would send us these articles, so we would always go back and forth. These articles showcase tremendous intelligence, the acumen, and the sense of humor. He tackled a huge variety of topics. He was really a 360 degrees kind of person. And I want to remember an article that he wrote just last July, because the title is very appropriate to the many lawyers who are in the audience today. The title is, Can Lawyers, Politicians, and Lawgivers Go to Heaven? I'm sure you have your answer. And actually the answer of Ron was a positive here. But the beginning of the article is great because it starts, like most of his articles start with a joke or an interesting reference. And the joke here was about God and Satan having an argument. And so God says, well, you know, maybe the best way for us to settle this is let's have a lawsuit and let's see who is right. So Satan looks at him and says, oh yeah, right. And where are you going to find a lawyer? He moved quickly in the article to being serious and to demonstrate that, in fact, lawyers, yes, can go to heaven. He made a fantastic exegesis of 3 cantos from the Divine Comedy of Dante Alighieri. Beautiful description. He took Canto 6 from Inferno, Canto 6 from Purgatory, Canto 6 from Paradise, and explained how they provide the moral and ethical foundations to be, in fact, a lawyer that can go to heaven. And I remember we were debating about this and talking about it, and we decided, and this reminds me of what Gail just said a few minutes ago, we decided we were going to teach one day a joint class on Dante Alighieri, my favorite, obviously, being Italian. And that's one of the things that you say, we grieve what will not happen now, and that's what I grieve. I grieve that we'll never be together in a class talking about Dante and arguing about the various aspects. The other thing that Ron really was a ferocious supporter of was free speech. He wrote countably many articles on free speech. We always were talking about this, especially as we see a scary tendency in academia, I should say, to try to put limits and to constrain free speech. He wrote an article in 2014 in defense of the First Amendment. And again, very funny way to describe it, he said that the attempt that Congress was looking at to amend the amendment, and I quote here, is like proposing to improve Leonardo's Mona Lisa by perhaps adding a lifelike firefly in the upper right-hand corner of the painting. That was his view of this attempt. And of course, then in 2015, the tragedy of Charlie Hebdo prompted another very profound article, an article that I didn't completely agree with, and so that prompted another series of conversation. And finally, in 2016, he wrote about this idea of safe space and trigger warning, and he said he joined the AAUP to warn us that quote, the presumption the student needs to be protected rather than challenged in a classroom is at once infantilizing and anti-intellectual. And now in this article is not Dante Alighieri, but he's using Herodotus to see it as an Aeschylus, as the foundation for his argument. His arguments were beautiful, and they were always grounded in some of these foundational readings. Some of his articles were met with disdain, anger, fury by people who disagree with those points. And to be honest, I think both he and I enjoy reading the comments even more than the article. I do that even now. When I read the paper, the article is never very interesting, but then you read the comments, and those are really sparking a lot of enthusiasm. And one day, just a few months ago, it was December, we were talking about one of these articles, he sent it to me and said, Daniele, if you read the comment section, you will see that a lot of people hate me and are disgusted that I'm allowed to teach law anywhere in the USA. Oh, well. Certainly that was not deterring him. And so this brings me to a closure. I want to close with something that is a direct quote from one of his articles, something that he wrote for the passing of his friend, Justice Antonin Scalia. And I like to think that he was thinking about himself as he wrote this quote, how appropriate that is. He says, now he has departed from this life. As for those who hate him, well, the only way to avoid the hate of some people is to leave no footprints. Nino, and I would like to change this into Ron, Ron left many footprints. We miss you, Ron. Thank you very much.
I first met Ron Rotunda when he came to my office shortly after he arrived at Chapman. He said, I understand you used to work for the federal government, which tells you he somehow found and read my resume. And he said, I've been invited to be on a panel in Washington. I have a problem. Can you help me? I was so thrilled. I could help him. What is it? He was asked to give a list of everything he'd ever written so he could pass security. He took me down to his office and showed me his bookshelf. He said, this is just some of it. This I wrote and much more. I said, this is easily solved. Take a photograph of your bookcase and send it to them, along with your CV. They'll get the idea. He did, and it did work. Good for him. Good for him. You cannot possibly list his accomplishments. The list goes on just like his bookshelf did. There's no end to them. So I'm just going to tell you a few things I know about Ron that I think I see as a faculty member and what I call a work friend. His impact was enormous in academia, and it was also enormous outside academia. He wrote op-ed pieces that were in all the national newspapers. I am sure whenever anything arrived with his name on it, it was just printed. This is going to be wonderful. We're going to print this. He couldn't begin to tell you every time it was printed. And the topics were very diverse. He testified before Congress not too long ago on climate change, because apparently that's another expertise Ron had. John Dean recently wrote that Ron was responsible for Watergate's most lasting positive impact. Watergate's most lasting positive impact. His impact reached around the world. His books have been translated into almost every language, including Korean, Japanese, Russian. He was very proud of the Japanese version. Russian and some other languages we weren't sure what they were. He was constitutional law advisor to the government of Cambodia, and when Eastern European countries needed to establish a constitution and a jurisprudence system they called Ron. That's very impressive. And how many people know that? How many people were affected? Outside of law, Ron had an endless curiosity. Others have mentioned some of the areas he was interested in. I don't even know the beginning. I will tell you a few. I know that he audited Vernon Smith and Bart Wilson's economics course twice. Twice. I don't even know what to say about that. I can't imagine. He presented a TEDx talk. I actually went to see this because I couldn't believe he was doing it. And the topic was the last 75 years of the 21st century. He covered topics like using the wisdom of the crowd to solve seemingly impossible social problems. How did he know about that? He did. Ron and I were work friends. Those of you who are students, I hope you have work friends. When you have your job, look for them and cherish them. They're the people you go to when something doesn't seem right and you don't know how to articulate it. You don't always have to complain, but you'd sure like to bounce it off of somebody you respect, who's smarter and who won't hurt you. They'll just listen. And they will also tell you if you're wrong or stupid. And what Ron did that I will never have again in my life is had a greater sense of outrage than I ever could muster. I thought of it as going to poke Ron. If something was bothering me and I just didn't feel like it was, what am I going to do about this? Nothing. Going to talk to Ron was so cathartic. He would be outraged and articulate about it, horrified. Always a little concerned an op-ed would appear, but he just backed you on that one. You think that's bad? Well, let me tell you how terrible that really. Yes, Ron, I feel much better. It's like going to the gym, you know? It's over now. Ron's got it. He never judged. He disagreed. Boy, did he disagree. And I asked Ron one of the first times I ever talked to him that if he ever disagreed with me, please, please, let me know and I will come to you wherever you are on the planet so you don't have to do it in writing. Ron could take page after page of someone's emails, and people can go on, and come back with one or two sentences that said it all, and be funny too. This is not something I can compete with. But Ron nailed it. Whenever there was a long debate of emails, I would just wait for Ron's to show up. Oh, there it is. There it is. That's what we're trying to say, and that's exactly what the problem is. What were we wasting all these other emails for? Why not just ask Ron? I asked some of my colleagues to describe Ron in a sentence. A lot of people couldn't. But congealing what I heard from faculty, staff, here's what some of them said. Ron could put politics aside. His view of the world and how he treated people were based on his curiosity and respect. I have an example. This has to do with somebody who's on this faculty. One of our colleagues was converting into Judaism. I went to the temple for this conversion, and Ron arrived and sat next to me. Actually arrived a little late because apparently the GPS on a Tesla isn't what you think it is. Sat next to me. And we're, there we are, and Ron picks up the book, and he says to me, I don't get it. Those of you who don't know, the book is backward. The front is at the back, you read the book's backward. And he didn't get it. So I said to Ron, look, Ron, just look at the person next to you. Whatever their page is, go there. I'm not going to, we don't have much time. We're in the ceremony here. Just do what they're doing. So obviously you don't get what just happened here. I got to tell a professor of legal ethics in a temple to look at someone else's book. And he did. And he wore the yarmulke, and he danced, and he broke bread, all for his friend. He took a day out of his life to help somebody and to share in their joy. It was a lovely experience. And he looked at somebody else's book. Some of his friends noted that Ron's office door was always open. It was open at 6:30 in the morning, but not many people knew that part. It was always open. If you could knock on the door, Ron never said, I'm too busy, and you know he had to be. He never said, come back later, I can't see you now. He never said that. There was always time. There was always enough to listen. He would listen to you and answer you, give you what you were looking for or not, or he didn't have to agree. But he never said no to people who needed a few minutes of his time. Anybody, students, faculty, staff. And it was so nice to have that experience to go in and talk to Ron, even if he disagreed, which was always appreciated as well. I think everybody did appreciate it. It was always clear when he was talking to anyone that he had very strong values. I know he had a love of his church, a love of his family, but he had a very clear sense of right and wrong. It was never vague to Ron. That's not the way it should be. This isn't okay. And not just complaining and griping about it. Let's do something. And if I have to, I'll do it myself. There was always that op-ed option. He would get involved. He knew that he had to fight for things. As a woman, I have to say I really appreciate his attitude toward women at work. More than you would ever imagine, with all else he had on the table, he was very conscious that women be treated fairly. He invited me to go with him to a breakfast at a law firm that was inviting its clients, and somehow Ron was on every mailing list, to discuss the new California law to protect women's rights at work. It's a very strong law. I hadn't gotten around to looking at it yet, and the whole point of this was they're talking to their clients about how you not get caught doing this. This law firm is going to advise you how not to get in trouble. And Ron referred to it as, let's go see what the other side's doing. He gathered up brochures, and he's taken notes, and ate their breakfast. It was actually pretty hilarious. A topic that's not funny was hilarious with Ron. Ron could put politics aside. Ron could think clearly without it, but he would never forget where he stood on anything. And when he felt it was wronged, I'll bet many of you know, many of us did, you did that wrong, he wouldn't hesitate to come tell you. He lived his values, and he made sure that everything in his life was consistent with what he believed. He used all of his knowledge and all of his intelligence all the time in places you wouldn't expect. And he also had passions outside of academia, outside of all that work could be. One of them was that car. I may be one of the few people who know he considered getting a Bentley. A Bentley. I told him nobody on the west side of LA would be caught dead in a Bentley unless they played basketball and were 19 years old. He had to have his Tesla. He loved his Tesla. And he actually loved his car before the Tesla, too. A couple of weeks ago, Ron and I were talking about it. Is everybody aware of this car? Everybody kind of know? Well, in case you don't, we took this picture a couple of weeks ago. This is Ron standing in front of his Tesla. I don't know if you can see his license plate is E. Musk. Come on, that took effort. Our plan was to get this picture to Elon Musk. We got this close. This close. I joined Twitter just so I could do it. But we were going to SpaceX. We had it worked out. Come on, that's fun. He had a good time. Being around Ron was always fun, even when you were working. Dean, this isn't what we do during work hours. This was totally different. We did different than work. Oops. Law was important to him. People were important to him. Right and wrong was important to him. His family was important to him. I only saw Ron at work, and I know quite a bit about his family. He cared a great deal. They were a big part of his life, and what happened to them mattered. What mattered to him as well was his students. We have a few of his students here today, and I don't know how many hours were in Ron's day. I guess when you start at 6:30, you can get a lot more done. He cared so much about his students, and he cared about them learning. Anybody who wrote a paper for him knows you could not escape Ron. Hour after hour, he would work on those papers with them, editing, talking about their research, talking about their topic. And he cared what his students thought. He read the evals. Students do evaluations of their faculty. Some of us read them. Not everybody has to. He did. He told me that he told some of his students, I don't know all of them if it happened all the time, he told some of his students in one of his class, when the evaluations were about to be made, he said, you know what your mother always told you? If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. So if you say nothing, we'll know exactly what you mean. I can only imagine their reactions. Probably how his class went all the time, like, is that real? Or I'm not quite sure where to go with that. I asked him once what the most bizarre or interesting, I can't remember what I called it, evaluation he ever got was. He said, that's easy. One student wrote, "Professor is too short." That's probably the only thing they could have found to criticize about their professor, and even that was not right. I want to thank you all for coming. I know that it really matters to Ron, and I know that Ron lives on. He lives on in his work. He lives on in his children and his grandchildren and his brother Don, and he lives on through all of his students, all of whom have gained from his time, his effort, and his work. He cared about all of you. Thank you.
So, a few years ago, when I was a prospective student looking to come to Chapman, I had a chance encounter with Professor Rotunda. I had no idea who he was at the time. I had no idea that I was standing in the presence of a legal juggernaut. But we talked about Chapman, about the law, about my interest in the law, and being as oblivious as I was, I didn't ask him anything about himself or what he'd done. At the close of the conversation, he kind of scurried off. This was probably about like 6:30 at night, 7. They'd had a buffet set up in the lobby at Chapman for the prospective students and some of the teachers. And before he left, he said, I got to get back to work. And I thought, you know, it's dark out, it's 7 o'clock. You know, he must have gotten in around 10 or something like that. But after I got to know him, I realized that he would get in early in the mornings and leave late at night. He put in his time and his work for the students. I've been honored to work with Professor Rotunda as his research assistant this past year and to take a class with him. And he was honorable enough to agree to take my research project at the time. Unfortunately, we never got around to working on it because of his passing. There are a couple things that I will always remember him by, as his kindness and his humor. You've heard some about his humor today, and I'll get into that in a minute. I don't think I'll be able to do his jokes justice. But on kindness, Professor Rotunda always had this habit of thanking his research assistants in a special way. Anytime a publication had just come out, he'd obtain a copy, and he'd put a Post-it note, one underneath the name, and then one on the page that was marked, and he would set it aside. It was a very kind gesture, considering the fact that he didn't really need our help. He was more than capable of doing it on his own, and of course, by the time I got around to working with him, he'd done it hundreds of times over. Now on his humor, some of you who have read his texts probably know this, but anytime he would cite to himself, he would put a disclaimer before the text saying, sorry, I lost my place. He would say, sorry for the shameless self-promotion. And then it would be immediately followed by Ron Rotunda and the publication he was citing. However, outside of this shameless self-promotion, Professor Rotunda was more than humble about his work and the impact he had in the legal community. It's an impact that will be felt for generations to come. Another anecdote that I can remember is one time during a lecture, Professor Rotunda was relying on a PowerPoint. He was having trouble getting the projector to work. After struggling for a few moments, he turned to the class, and without missing a beat, he said, "These computers are like dogs. They can sense fear. That's why they're not working today. While he may have struggled with the computer that day, he was far from scared of them. From what I gathered, he was quite the techie. As you know, he drove a Tesla. And in his teachings, he encouraged lawyers to keep up with the risks that are inherent in storing client confidences on the cloud, in metadata, and so forth. I learned much from my time with Professor Rotunda. He taught me valuable lessons that I will use throughout my career and beyond. However, Professor Rotunda's lessons were not limited to just legal academia or the next generation of attorneys. They went far beyond that. After he passed, I received a call from a family friend who was an engineer. This friend had called to ask whether I knew this legal ethics guy at Chapman, Ron Rotunda. A little confused, I said yes. Not many people outside of the law or legal academia know about, Ron Rotunda or legal ethics. My friend explained that he had just finished watching the news on a segment asking whether a sitting president could be indicted. At the close of the segment, the broadcaster referenced Professor Rotunda, his passing, and that he would have had some insightful commentary on the subject. Indeed, he would have. Luckily for us, his writings remain. With that, I'd like to read a short passage from his Legal Ethics Nutshell, which I think captures his vision of the profession he worked so hard to better. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit because it says we, and I don't feel comfortable saying we as if I'm a lawyer yet. Lawyers, like other professionals, help people. Granted, unlike engineers, lawyers construct no bridges. Unlike doctors, they mend no bones. Unlike architects, they design no buildings. Unlike artists, they paint no portraits. There is little that lawyers do that the human hand can touch. Yet, if a lawyer does their job professionally, they take on other people's burdens. They relieve stress and pursue justice. Lawyers take the veneer of civilization and make it a little thicker. Professor Rotunda embraced the idea of lawyers doing their jobs professionally. He made that clear in his writings, his teachings, and his interactions with students. I'm sad that our time together was cut short, and I will forever be grateful for the time we shared. Fortunately, he left behind a legacy in printed word that I can always turn to when in need of his advice. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Drake and Kathy. And I also want to thank you, Jane Kaser, for all of your help today, and Dean Parlow, and thank you, President Strupa. And a special thank you, and you're going to hear more, and I very much appreciate Hannah Yee, who's a COPA student who's playing for us today. I also want to thank Don Rotunda for your assistance. It's been a pleasure to work with you this week. And would like to invite all of you, as soon as we're finished up here and Dean Parlow comes up one more time, we'd like to invite you to go over to Kennedy Hall for a reception. And there you can visit with his friends and his family. And Nora's here, and husband Jack, and Mark, his son and daughter. Thanks for being here. And Don will be over there. And I know that they would love to hear your stories. So I hope that you go and share some of your stories of Ron with them. Also, as you're leaving, there's a guest book that they would love to have you sign today. So please do that. And so following words of benediction prayer from Father Luevano, as well as more words from Dean Parlow, then we'll all join together in a reception.
In the Gospel of Luke, early in the Gospel of Luke, Mary and Joseph, in accord with the Jewish tradition, take their newborn child, Jesus, to the temple for the blessing. There they encounter Simeon, an old man who has spent his entire life praying for the coming of the Messiah. And when he sees Jesus, he voices these words. These words are the words that are recited by every priest and religious person in the Catholic tradition the last words before they go to sleep at night. And they also are the final Catholic words at Mass at a funeral service, bidding farewell to the faithful soul as they journey to the Lord. Now, Master, let your servant go in peace, according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you prepare in the sight of your people, a light for the revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of your people Israel.
So may peace be with all of us. Dean Parlow.
So we heard a lot about Ron's wonderful sense of humor. He actually had a website, ronrotunda.org, and he had lots of funny stuff on it, including 45 pages of lawyer jokes that he had accumulated over the years. And he had a very funny line on it saying, if you have a funny joke, send it to me, and I might include it on this. And if it's really good, I'll even put it on a shirt and send it to you. And if it's really, really good, I'll actually wash the shirt before sending it to you. It was very funny. So we thought what might be appropriate is to share some of those lawyer jokes before we head over to Kennedy Hall, again, to try to capture some of Ron in what we're doing here. So some of them were not appropriate, so I'm trying to read the more appropriate ones. Why won't sharks attack lawyers? Professional courtesy. Conversation between two people. Mo says, "It was so cold last night, I just couldn't believe it." Joe says, "Well, how cold was it?" Mo says, "It was so cold that I saw a lawyer with both hands in his own pocket." Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, and an honest lawyer and an old drunk are walking down the street together when they simultaneously spot a $100 bill. Who gets it? The old drunk, of course. The other three are mythical creatures. This one's a little long, but bear with me. A lawyer questioning a doctor at trial. Question: Doctor, before you performed the autopsy, did you check for a pulse? Answer: no. Did you check for blood pressure? No. Did you check for breathing? No. So then it is possible that the patient was alive when you began the autopsy? No. How can you be sure, doctor? Because his brain was sitting in my desk in a jar. But could the patient still have been alive nevertheless? It is possible he could have been alive and practicing law somewhere. Ron gave a quote from a DC tax lawyer. Contrary to what some people claim, the tax laws have a lot of respect for logic. They use it so sparingly. How many lawyers' jokes are there? Only 3. The rest are all true. A defense attorney was cross-examining a police officer during a felony trial. Officer, did you see my client fleeing the scene? No, sir, but I subsequently observed a person matching the description of the offender running several blocks away. Officer, who provided this description? The officer who responded to the scene. Fellow officer provided the description of this so-called offender. Do you trust your fellow officers? Yes, sir, with my life. With your life? Let me ask you this then, officer. Do you have a locker room in the police station? A room where you change your clothes in preparation for your daily duties? Yes, we do, sir. And do you have a locker in that room? Yes, sir, I do. And do you have a lock on that locker? Yes, sir. Now, why is it, officer, if you trust your fellow officers with your life, that you find it necessary to lock your locker in a room you share with those same officers? You see, sir, we share the building with a court complex, and sometimes the lawyers have been known to walk through the room. 2 more. A man and woman were conversing at a party. The woman said, "Lawyers are jerks." The man responded, "I take offense to that remark." "Why?" said the woman. "Are you a lawyer?" He responded, "No, I'm a jerk." And then this is actually the joke that the president was talking about before, but I'll end and you'll see why with it. Again, it's a slightly different version of it. God decided that he needed some maintenance done on the pearly gates. Since all of his angels were busy saving sinners on the earth below, he decided to have the devil do the work. God knew, however, that he could not trust the devil, so he wrote a contract. The devil signed it and did part of the work. The devil then got bored and refused to either finish the job or clean up the mess, as specified in the contract. Of course, God wasn't happy. He visited the devil in a foul mood. "Lucifer, finish that work and clean up the mess like you agreed. You signed that contract. Perform, or so help me, I'll sue you." The devil with a crooked smile says, "Where are you going to find a lawyer?" Good thing is we know that God was just joined by an incredible lawyer, someone who we'll all miss. And I look forward to sharing stories with you over at Kennedy Hall. Thank you for being here today.